Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time not too long ago, just 150 years or so, when medicine meant mustard plasters, leeches, and something warm and starchy tucked under your shirt. You're burning up with a mystery fever. The bed linens are scratchy, the wallpaper's a dizzying floral blur, and the doctor is late. You're pretty sure your toes just went numb. But don't worry, the solution is not ibuprofen. It's hot potatoes, specifically hot potatoes, in your armpits. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time you're tuning in. I love seeing the global bedtime map unfold. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your Victorian caretaker clatters into the room with a tin basin, a ladle, and 3 steaming potatoes wrapped in muslin. "Don't squirm," she murmurs as she lifts your arm and shoves one under. The smell is earthy, slightly scorched, and somehow comforting. In this era, potatoes aren't just dinner. They're a cornerstone of folk medicine. People press them to temples, rub them on warts, even bury them in fields to transfer disease back to the earth. You're getting the underarm spa treatment. Victorian medicine is a strange dance between superstition, emerging science, and good old-fashioned guesswork. Fevers were thought to rise from bad air miasmas, so keeping you warm to sweat it out made sense. Add potatoes. Perfect. They were believed to absorb impurities from the body, much like a sponge soaking up tea. A hot, starchy root vegetable tea sponge. Historians still argue whether this practice stemmed more from Galenic humoral theory or from Germanic peasant remedies passed down over hearth fires. Either way, you're now baking slowly under your woolen blanket, both armpits loaded with piping hot tubers, and no one seems to think this is odd. The room smells like an unattended oven. Your forehead beads with sweat, and your nightshirt sticks to your back. This, the caretaker tells you, is a good sign. The potatoes are drawing out the heat. She doesn't explain how they know when to stop. Maybe when they start to smell like dinner. You glance at the end table, a pewter cup of barley water, a folded rag soaked in vinegar, and something ominously labeled tooth tincture. Apparently, every ailment from ague to melancholia has a tincture, and if it doesn't, someone will invent one. Your cousin swears that wrapping a raw potato in string and wearing it around your neck can prevent rheumatism. There's no evidence for this, obviously, but he's sprightly for a man who insists the potato whispers encouragement. Quirky tidbit, sure, but when your joints start aching, you'll consider it. Just as your thoughts drift toward nap or coma, the door creaks open. A young doctor steps in tweed coat. Immaculate hair, side-parted and pomaded. He takes one look at you, nods solemnly and says, "Let's start with warmth and touch." You brace for something clinical. Instead, he walks over and hugs you. Yes, that's part of the treatment plan, but we'll get to that next. The doctor's embrace is firm, but oddly formal. More like you've just received bad news at a Victorian funeral than a bedside greeting. He smells faintly of lavender, damp wool, and boiled sugar drops. As his arms settle around you, he murmurs, Now. Let the tension leave the body." You blink into his waistcoat, still cradling a lukewarm potato under each arm. Touch therapy, you learn, is not some fringe whim, but a widely respected practice in Victorian circles. In fact, Many physicians of the time believed that a well-timed hug, a firm grasp of the hands, or even a sustained forehead touch could regulate the patient's humors. The body, after all, was thought to operate like a delicate machine, and human contact, much like winding a clock, might just reset the internal gears. The logic's simple. Emotional disturbances like hysteria, melancholia, or nervous exhaustion were thought to stem from an imbalance of internal forces, sometimes spiritual, sometimes electromagnetic. If a mother's touch calms a crying child, why shouldn't a doctor's embrace soothe an adult spleen? Historians still argue whether this was based more in proto-psychology or the lingering influence of mesmerism, where animal magnetism was transferred through physical closeness. Either way, you find yourself wrapped in the arms of a man who once dissected a cadaver by candlelight and considers hugging part of his medical license. As he releases you, he nods again, gravely, satisfied. You're responding well. You're not sure what you're responding to. Confusion, heat exhaustion, a deeply repressed longing for non-judgmental human affection. He next reaches for your wrist, not to check your pulse in any conventional way, but to simply hold it gently. The pulse tells the mood, he explains. Fast pulse. Fast thoughts. Slow pulse, anchored soul. You wonder how much of this was covered in his medical training at Edinburgh. There's a curious duality in Victorian doctors. On one hand, they're hyper-rational, obsessed with charts, data, bodily fluids stored in labeled glass vials. On the other, they believe that a firm pat on the back could ward off insanity. It's like getting therapy from a man who also collects leeches. Touch therapy wasn't limited to hugs either. In private clinics, you might be cradled in a resting lap, literally an adult-sized cushion, fashioned after a nurse's thighs. The patient would sit or recline like an overgrown child and be rocked gently while being told reassuring phrases. One popular phrase, "There is no fire within you." Victorian burnout was surprisingly poetic. Your own treatment escalates when the doctor asks you to stand. Balance, he mutters. The body cannot heal if it cannot bear weight. He clasps your shoulders and walks you slowly back and forth across the carpet, his hand never leaving your spine. You begin to feel like an awkward debutante at a very stiff waltz. To Victorian eyes, everything from mental breakdowns to indigestion could be the result of overstimulation of the mind, of the nerves of the spine. So it made sense that the antidote would be gentleness, stillness, physical connection. Modern studies have proven the benefits of human touch for reducing cortisol and improving immune response. But back then, it was all instinct anecdote and a little bit of hopeful arm squeezing. The doctor finally guides you back to bed and fluffs the pillows with priest-like solemnity. Now rest. We'll begin the aromatic compress shortly. He turns toward his leather satchel, rummaging for something that smells suspiciously like nutmeg and turpentine. But you're just trying to process the fact that in this world of primitive X-rays and questionable hygiene, a physician who just hugged you might genuinely be your best shot at recovery. Your toes still feel like boiled asparagus, and the potatoes are cooling. The next thing to enter your room after the doctor's calming pats and long stares is a thick plume of lavender steam. It curls in from the hallway like a spirit arriving fashionably late to a seance. Your senses stir just slightly as a maid deposits a ceramic bowl on your side table. Inside, lavender, chamomile, rosemary, and something that suspiciously resembles onion peel. This, says the doctor, is for the nerves. Of course it is. In the Victorian mind, nerves are the root of nearly all suffering. Too many thoughts, too much stimulation, and poof, your nervous system becomes a knotted spool. The remedy, fragrance, warmth, and a splash of bloodletting if things get dicey. As the herbal steam rises, the doctor pulls out a gleaming leech jar. You tense. Not the leeches, not tonight. But yes, tonight. Leeches, those shiny little vampires, were not just medieval relics, they were Victorian darlings. Hospitals in London kept them by the hundreds. You had a cough leeches, backache leeches, sudden terror at 3 a.m., more leeches. They were believed to balance the bad blood caused by emotional or physical stress. You might not understand it, but hey, it beats being trepanned. The doctor chooses a spot behind your left ear. For melancholy, he says. You feel the cold slither as the creature latches on. It's gross. It's tingly. You try not to think about it. Instead, you breathe in the floral mist, pretending it's a spa treatment and not a 19th century exsanguination ritual. Historians still debate whether the obsession with leeching in the Victorian age was a clumsy holdover from medieval bloodletting or a psychosomatic placebo that paradoxically actually helped patients feel in control. Either way, your doctor watches your slow blood dribble with an expression bordering on reverence. Excellent, he murmurs. The sadness is flowing out. You begin to wonder if your spleen has ever felt joy. After 5 minutes, he gently detaches the leech, places it back in its glass jar, and scribbles something in his notebook. You peek. It just says, patient responds to lavender and loss. Quirky as it is, the Victorian obsession with scent and balance wasn't entirely unfounded. Before germ theory took over, it made sense to assume that illness came from invisible clouds, bad vapors, foul airs. Doctors carried pomanders, vinegar-soaked cloths, or even hollow canes filled with rosemary to breathe through in the streets. Your current remedy, though lavender water plus leech plus onion skin, is peak bedtime blend. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to let the smell do its job. The floral calm seeps in slowly. Then a sharp tickle rises in your throat. Oh no. The cough is back. Before you can protest, the doctor retrieves a small glass bottle from his bag. It's the color of caramel and smells faintly of licorice and despair. Chlorodyne, he says proudly. One of our finest tonics. For cough, restlessness, and certain existential ailments. You take a hesitant sip. It burns and instantly numbs your tongue. You've just swallowed one of the most popular Victorian concoctions, a blend of chloroform, morphine, cannabis extract, and treacle. It's the Wild West of medicine in liquid form. Chlorodyne was sold over the counter and hailed as a miracle. Children were given it for teething pain. Adults used it to sleep, dream, or forget. Some even wrote poetry on it. Many also developed lifelong addictions. But that was a problem for another doctor on another day. You lie back dazed. The lavender, the leech, the opiate syrup. It's like being serenaded by a botanical vampire on a cloud of narcotics. Somewhere outside, a carriage rattles past. Inside, you are a Victorian experiment swaddled in wool and whimsy. And you haven't even gotten to the part where they electrify your spine. That's tomorrow morning. The sun arrives like a reluctant guest, sliding through the slats in your wooden shutters and painting stripes across your forehead. Your mouth tastes faintly of molasses and regret residue, no doubt from last night's cocktail of lavender steam, leech saliva, and chlorodyne. You feel vaguely alive. Also, vaguely, like you could levitate. The doctor returns at dawn. He's punctual. Too punctual. He holds a leather case like it contains the Holy Grail. Or maybe something far less sacred and significantly more tingly. Time to invigorate the nerves, he says, with the gleam of a man about to plug you into something deeply suspicious. You try to sit up, but the starch in your nightshirt resists. You're half crumpled, half curious. He opens the case. Inside, the portable pulver mocker chain, an early Victorian invention that promised to deliver mild galvanic stimulation through a series of copper coils and moistened cloth pads. To you, it looks like a steampunk torture device designed by a sleep-deprived blacksmith. He carefully wets 2 linen strips in vinegar, wraps them around your forearms, and then connects the wires. Breathe normally, he says, as if that's easy to do while being turned into a human battery. The first zap is polite. A gentle buzz, like a cat's purr made of static. You flinch anyway. That's the current aligning your magnetic disposition, he assures you, adjusting the dial. Victorian doctors were obsessed with electricity. It was new, mysterious, invisible, but powerful. They believed it could restart muscles, awaken lazy organs, even correct immoral thoughts. Your liver is sluggish. Zap it. Your brain too excitable. Zap that too. Some clinics even claimed electrical stimulation could cure criminal tendencies. One suspects this may have been more about discouraging repeat offenses through sheer discomfort. Historians still debate whether these electric therapies were truly medical or just elaborate theater, an early attempt at placebo-backed science using a light show. Patients often claim to feel restored, though modern medicine suggests they were mostly just stunned into silence. As the current snakes through your limbs, you're told to clench your hands, then release. Again. Again. Vital energy must circulate, the doctor drones. Stagnation is the mother of disorder. You try to nod sagely, but it comes out more like a low-voltage twitch. At some point, the maid reappears with a cup of something gray and lukewarm. It smells like oat milk coal and resignation. Gravy water, she says almost proudly. Breakfast. You sip it because resistance feels unwise when you're already being electrocuted for wellness. To distract yourself, you examine the device. It's essentially a wearable circuit. Victorians loved wearing their medicine. Electromagnetic belts, magnetic hairbrushes, even magnetic corsets were sold to the public. Some women even wore electrified necklaces, claiming it enhanced fertility. Science unlikely, but shockingly fashionable. Your session continues for 20 minutes. The doctor scribbles notes between jolts. You can see the words vibrational misalignment and suggests underlying spleen apathy. You're not sure what apathetic spleens do, but yours definitely isn't throwing a party right now. Finally, the straps are removed and your skin tingles like you just rolled in a field of nettles. Your hands are weirdly light, possibly because you've been clenching them like you're auditioning for a Victorian strongman contest. The doctor pats your shoulder. We'll skip the mustard poultice this morning. The current has done its duty. You don't know whether to feel grateful or robbed. Before he leaves, he sets a small crystal dish on your bedside table. Inside is a single sugar cube soaked in tincture. "This is for aftershocks," he whispers cryptically. You stare at it like it might bite. Then you close your eyes and try to sleep again, even as your muscles remember every jolt and your spine hums faintly with borrowed lightning. You will dream of static and warm vinegar. You awaken to the sound of bubbling, soft, hissing bubbles like a pot of soup kept just below a boil. You crack an eye open. It's not soup. It's you. Or rather, it's the sulfur bath they're preparing down the hall. The maid knocks gently, holding a bundle of gray towels and what looks alarmingly like a large canvas cocoon. "Bath time," she says, with the weariness of someone who has boiled many patients before breakfast. You rise slowly, limbs still tingling from the morning's electric adventures, and allow yourself to be wrapped in the bathrobe. The doctor reappears just long enough to remind you, with grave seriousness, that sweating is the gateway to the soul. He says this while adjusting a thermometer the size of a candlestick. Victorians loved sweating. Not at balls or on horseback, that would be unseemly, but as therapy glorious. Every pore was a chimney, and illness was the smoke. To sweat meant to cleanse the blood, realign the humors, and flush out the invisible villains that clung to your spirit like soot. Hydrotherapy, or more specifically, the sweat cure, was a signature treatment in many sanatoriums. You didn't just soak, you were baked, basted, and bundled like a Victorian dumpling. The bath you're about to endure smells of rotten eggs and iron filings. Welcome to the sulfur chamber. You step into the shallow tub, the water cloudy and eerily warm. A nurse pours more sulfurous liquid over your shoulders while humming something off-key. "Don't hold your breath," she advises. The vapors work better when you breathe through the mouth. Historians still argue whether the popularity of sulfur and steam was due to a genuine belief in mineral absorption, or just an excuse to make medicine feel like an event. One theory: many Victorian doctors were inspired by Roman bathhouses and wanted to replicate their grandeur, if not their hygiene standards. You're not alone in your soak. Across the room, another patient, a man with an unfortunate mustache and an even more unfortunate rash, is wrapped from neck to toes in layers of wool, sweating profusely. "Blanket bath," the nurse explains. "He's on hour 2. You try not to make eye contact. The heat creeps in, slow but persistent. Your cheeks flush. Your scalp prickles. Somewhere near your kidneys, something begins to itch. A bucket of cold water is dumped nearby. Not for you, just ambience, apparently. One of the orderlies uses a long wooden spoon to stir the bath. This feels less like medicine and more like being added to a stew. To pass the time, you examine the tiles. A few are chipped. Some are decorated with tiny Greco-Roman figures, doing things with urns. It's unclear if the urns are sanitary. Finally, after what feels like a lifetime and one mild hallucination involving your grandmother and a steam train, the nurse declares the bath complete. You're helped out of the tub, dried roughly, and rubbed down with something gritty. Salt, she says, for circulation. You're wrapped tightly in the canvas cocoon and left to lie on a warming table, swaddled like a sweaty, overcooked burrito. You may feel sleepy, the nurse says kindly, or faint, or both. Quirky fact: some wealthier homes installed personal sweat closets, small chambers with heat vents, scented herbs, and enough space to sit and perspire while reading a sermon. You now envy those people deeply. Eventually, your wrappings are removed. You're dazed, damp, a bit dizzy. But oddly enough, your lungs feel clearer. Maybe it's the sulfur. Maybe it's the sheer relief of not being boiled anymore. You're handed a linen robe and guided back to your room. The bed is cool. The sheets crisp. Your reflection in the mirror looks like someone who fought a volcano and lost politely. And just when you think the therapy's over, the doctor reappears with a small iron bar and a box labeled magnetic corrector. Oh no, not again. You are not ready for magnetism therapy. You've barely finished sweating out your body's sins, and now the doctor is approaching with what looks like a tiny anvil on a string. He calls it a polarity rod. You call it suspicious. Without a word, he places the iron bar at the crown of your head and closes his eyes as if waiting to receive a divine message. You suppress a cough. The room smells like sulfur lavender and hot dust. It's not unpleasant exactly, just confusing. Much like everything else since they shoved potatoes under your arms. Your polarity, the doctor murmurs, leans dangerously toward the south. You're not sure what that means, but he looks disappointed in your magnetic field. Victorians were absolutely enchanted by magnetism. Not just the science of it, the idea that the human body, emotions, and illnesses were tied to magnetic forces. It was a seductive concept. If electricity could revive the muscles, surely magnetism could realign the soul. Why else would they build magnetic belts, magnetic brushes, even magnetic underpants? Some doctors believed every emotional imbalance, melancholia, hysteria, even excessive cheerfulness, was the result of your poles being out of sync. Historians still argue whether this stemmed from actual electromagnetic research or a poetic metaphor gone rogue. Either way, it gained a devoted following. The doctor now circles you slowly, pressing small magnets to your spine, hips, and forehead. Your liver is repelling joy, he explains. It's likely reversed polarity. You want to ask how a liver's joy is measured, but you're worried the answer will involve leeches again. He produces a set of magnetic slippers and urges you to stand. The soles feel oddly heavy, like walking on old coins. North pole to heel, south to toe, he instructs. Balance is walked into being. You shuffle forward trying to feel spiritual while waddling like a goose in iron shoes. One of the more fringe ideas you'll hear during this treatment is that magnetism could literally pull disease out of the blood. One woman reportedly wore a magnetic choker for 3 years and claimed her arthritis melted. Another swore that sleeping between north-facing pillows prevented nightmares. There's no hard evidence for any of this. But let's be honest, you've been electrified, steeped in sulfur, and emotionally hugged by a man with sideburns. Why not believe in magic magnets? After the magnetic shuffle, the doctor hands you a curious device, a smooth curved wand with 2 polished stones set in each end. Now sweep, he says. You mimic his gestures, waving the wand slowly from your chest downward. You are redirecting vital energies, he adds. You feel like you're conducting an orchestra made entirely of invisible feelings. He nods in approval. You'll sleep more soundly tonight. Just avoid reading near a fire or arguing with anyone during twilight. Noted. There's a strange comfort in this ritual. The tools may be silly. The science might be shaky. But the routine, the steady voice, The cool touch of stone against skin offers something resembling peace, or at least a distraction from your aching thighs. Quirky tidbit: some Victorian households hosted magnetic dinner parties where guests were seated in alternating polar alignments and passed silver magnets with the salad. The goal was to eat harmoniously and avoid digestive tension. One suspects the wine did most of the work. Back in your room, you're told to lie down while the magnetism settles. You comply, of course. At this point, you'll do anything short of drilling a hole in your skull. As you rest, the maid dims the lamp and places a small bag of iron filings near your pillow. For mental clarity, she says, you stare at it, this little satchel of powdered rust, and wonder if you'll wake up with a perfectly aligned aura or a mild case of tetanus. Either way, it's working. Your limbs are heavy. Your mind oddly still. But don't get too relaxed. Tomorrow brings a splash of cold water therapy that will make today's sulfur bath feel like a lullaby. Your eyes open to a breeze. Not a soft, romantic sort of breeze. No, this is the kind of breeze that Victorian doctors would call invigorating, and your lungs would call a lawsuit. The windows are wide open. The air outside smells like damp soil, coal smoke, and an overly enthusiastic meadow. Somewhere, someone is singing off-key about cabbage. Welcome to your hydropathy morning. The maid cheerfully informs you that your next treatment is a full wet sheet wrap, followed by a morning plunge. You blink. She continues as if she's describing tea service. Doctor says you're overdue for a cold water correction. Hydropathy, known more grandly as the water cure, was Victorian Britain's favorite mix of punishment and refreshment. It was thought to calm the nerves, cleanse the organs, and with enough dedication, scare the melancholy right out of your marrow. You're guided down a long corridor to the treatment room, stone floors, frosted windows, and a large wooden bench in the middle. It looks like somewhere you'd interrogate a medieval heretic. Two attendants greet you with a nod and a pair of soaked, freezing white sheets. You flinch. No sudden movements, one says calmly, just before they begin wrapping. The cold hits you like betrayal. Wet cloth is wound tightly around your arms, chest, and legs, squeezing out any warmth you foolishly brought from your bed. Then a layer of dry wool. Then another. You are now a human burrito of shivering misery. Historians still debate the origins of the wrap method, whether it grew from ancient Roman bathing rituals or was invented by a very determined German farmer with a creek and too much free time. But by the Victorian era, it was gospel wrap. The patient tightly chill them to the soul and wait. You lie still, cocooned on the bench, your teeth gently performing Morse code. After several minutes, could be 10, could be an hour, your body begins to heat itself. This is the whole point. By tricking the body into panic, it mobilizes its inner forces, sort of like scaring your organs into behaving. The doctor enters with a stopwatch and a smile. How do we feel, he asks. You can't reply because your lips have lost sensation. He takes that as a good sign. Next comes the dunking. You're guided, still swaddled, and vibrating like a cello string toward a wooden barrel in the courtyard. The water is freshly drawn from the spring, which is another way of saying ice melt cold. Brace, the nurse says, and with very little ceremony, they pour a bucket of water directly over your head. It's so cold, your thoughts shatter. Victorian water treatments weren't for the faint of heart. Some patients were blasted with high-pressure hoses. Others endured alternating plunges, hot then cold, then hot again, like being treated by a sadistic barista. For you, today's menu is a cold dunk, a vigorous towel rub, and a brisk march through the garden. Movement is key, the doctor says, handing you a pair of stiff shoes. You walk. You stumble. You hear a donkey bray somewhere nearby. That feels symbolic. You're told that hydropathy can treat everything from dyspepsia to criminal tendencies. One woman reportedly cured her novel reading addiction by immersing her feet in icy water twice a day. Another man claimed a single bucket of spring water helped him forgive his cousin for stealing his umbrella. A fringe belief: in some circles, cold water repelled negative spiritual energy. This is why some therapists insisted on washing patients' feet before sessions, not for hygiene, but to prevent soul residue from clinging to the floorboards. You don't know about soul residue, but your toes are clinging to consciousness by a thread. Eventually, the ordeal ends. You're wrapped in dry wool, given a steaming mug of barley tea, and led back to your room. Your skin is tingling. Your heart is racing. And yet, bizarrely, you feel alert, alive. A little like someone who's just survived a shipwreck, but without the drowning part. The doctor pats your shoulder. Hydropathy never lies, he says. You resist the urge to cry. The maid tucks you back in with extra blankets. Next up, she says you've got garden therapy. Because, of course you do. You are ushered out into the garden just after your barley tea has returned sensation to your lips. The morning fog has retreated, replaced by the damp optimism of overwatered hedges and orderly gravel paths. A robin hops nearby, eyeing your limp form as if to say, "You again?" The maid hands you a trowel. "Dig until you feel less hopeless," she says with a shrug, then points you toward a raised bed of struggling cabbages. Welcome to therapeutic gardening, the Victorian version of group therapy, but with more mud and fewer emotional breakthroughs. You kneel slowly, joints still echoing from the hydrotherapy. The soil is dark and heavy, but warm beneath the surface. There's something oddly soothing about the sound of trowel meeting earth. You breathe deep. Earthworms squirm past your fingers. One makes eye contact. You nod respectfully. Victorians believe deeply in the curative power of nature. Sanatoriums were often built in rural areas, not just for fresh air, but for proximity to the soil. To the Victorian mind, contact with the earth could literally ground the emotions, releasing negative energy, aligning the soul's compass, and ideally stopping you from weeping every time someone mentions your mother. Historians still argue whether these outdoor therapies were more about distraction than cure, or whether they genuinely helped patients heal. The evidence is inconclusive, but we do know that gardening became one of the few approved activities for those suffering from nervous ailments, especially if done in silence and accompanied by morally uplifting thoughts. You've just spent 5 minutes uprooting a turnip and imagining you're strangling your childhood piano teacher. Close enough. The doctor watches you from a nearby bench, making notes. Soil under the nails, he mutters to himself, suggests anxiety with suppressed artistic leanings. You are about to protest when he adds, or a past life as a mole. He doesn't smile. You begin to suspect he might be serious. Nearby, another patient is raking leaves into geometric patterns, muttering numbers under his breath. He's wearing a hat made entirely of pressed flowers. No one stops him. Apparently, floral hats are part of the process. In some asylums of the time, especially the more progressive ones, patients were assigned garden plots and expected to tend them daily. not as punishment, but as restoration. It wasn't about results. It was about rhythm. The seasons, the sunrise, the slow, silent growth of something alive. You're told one woman spent 6 months whispering to a tomato plant before she spoke to a human again. Quirky tidbit. In 1878, a Scottish hospital published a pamphlet titled The Therapeutic Potential of the Parsnip, which claimed root vegetables had balancing influences upon the moral self. It was never peer-reviewed, but someone out there believed in carrot-based salvation. After an hour, your back is sore, your hands are dirty, and your mind is surprisingly clear. The roses don't seem quite so judgmental. The sky is less oppressive. Even the cabbages, despite their visible failure, appear dignified in defeat. The doctor approaches and offers you a folded napkin. Inside is a small biscuit, slightly stale, and a sprig of mint. To replenish your humors, he says, then vanishes back into the hedge maze like a consulting detective from a poorly plotted novel. You chew the biscuit thoughtfully. It tastes like sawdust and hope. The maid claps her hands. Back inside now, she chirps. You've got a posture inspection and a session on table manners. You stare at her, unsure whether she's joking. She isn't, because in the Victorian age, bad etiquette isn't just rude, it's pathological. Back inside, you are directed to sit, not lounge, not slouch. Sit in a straight-back chair with a cushion that feels like it's stuffed with bricks and disapproval. The doctor stands nearby with a brass protractor and a clipboard. The maid mutters, "Don't lean left again." That's where the spleen sulks. Welcome to the Victorian concept of etiquette as medicine. In this world, posture is more than a matter of pride. It's a diagnostic tool. A crooked spine suggests poor digestion. A drooping shoulder hints at spiritual laziness. And a twitching eyelid, that could mean latent hysteria or too much goose. The doctor steps forward and places a hardcover book atop your head. Hold, you hold, now rise. Gently, you rise gently. The book falls anyway. He clicks his tongue and writes something about habitual moral fatigue. It's easy to forget that in Victorian Britain, behavior wasn't just judged, it was treated. Deviations from social norms, especially among women and children, were frequently diagnosed as illnesses. A girl who laughed too loudly might be labeled overstimulated. A boy who refused to eat peas with the proper spoon could be assigned a regimen of posture drills and solitude. You, for your part, are being observed for slouching and buttering your toast with the wrong wrist. Historians still argue whether this obsessive attention to etiquette was a byproduct of rising middle-class anxieties or a genuine attempt to instill self-discipline during an era of rapid urban sprawl. What's clear is that the line between social grace and medical advice was blurry, and sometimes soaked in lavender water. You are now presented with a tray, one boiled egg, a square of toast, a slice of pear, and a fork that looks like it's judging you. The nurse encourages you to chew each bite 12 times, exactly 12. 10 is animalistic, she warns. 14 suggests unresolved longing. You chew, you count, you question everything. Halfway through your toast, the doctor appears again with a small silver bell. A test, he says. Clink the spoon once if you feel stable. Twice if emotionally vulnerable. You hesitate. What does 3 clinks mean? Too late. He's already recording your pause as a symptom. Etiquette therapy also included conversational training. You are asked to read aloud from the Moral Housekeeper's Almanac, pausing to enunciate key phrases like economy is the heart's true virtue, and a quiet mouth is a quiet spirit. You're not sure if you agree, but everyone's watching, and one of them is holding a sugar cube that looks like it might be medicated. The idea here is not just refinement, it's regulation. If your manners are correct, your mind must be too. Right? Quirky historical tidbit. In 1852, a London clinic published a pamphlet titled Decorum as Tonic, claiming that graceful carriage and careful grammar have prevented more illnesses than quinine. It's unclear how this was measured, but the clinic also offered punctuation lessons for the melancholic. After the meal, you're instructed to walk a circle around the sitting room while balancing a napkin on your left hand and answering polite inquiries about the weather. This is not optional. This is recovery. At one point, you accidentally sneeze. The room freezes. The maid gasps. The doctor glares. You scramble for your handkerchief and manage a late but sincere beg pardon. It is noted as mild recovery under duress. To you, this all feels like elaborate theater. But to the Victorians, decorum was a life raft. In a world of cholera chimney sweeps and frequent existential collapse, control over one's posture and soup etiquette might have felt like the last frontier of sanity. Finally, you're released from your manners gauntlet and led gently back to your room, where the maid offers you a hot compress for your temples and a folded card reading, "Afternoon Session, Hysteria and the Bicycle." You stare at it. A bicycle. The maid smiles. "It's very modern," she says. You suspect nothing about what comes next will feel gentle. You've faced sulfur baths, spine-zapping magnetism, and moral toast. But now standing awkwardly in the gravel courtyard beside an upright bicycle, you're being told to ride away your hysteria. This apparently is progress. The maid holds the bicycle steady. The doctor stands nearby with a clipboard and a monocle, looking as though he's about to judge a dressage performance. "We'll begin with 3 clockwise laps," he says. "Unless your temperament suggests rebellion, in which case reverse." You do not know what your temperament suggests. You barely know what day it is. But you climb onto the bicycle, nonetheless wobbling like a duck on stilts. Victorian Britain had a very particular relationship with bicycles. They were new. They were scandalous. They made freedom portable, especially for women who were suddenly spotted unchaperoned, pedaling through parks, wind-tugging scandalously at their skirts. Naturally, doctors got involved. You push off and begin to pedal slowly. The wheels creak. The saddle is unforgiving. Your legs remember the cold water from earlier and protest loudly. You make it about half a lap before the doctor waves you to a halt. "Good," he says. "Now dismount, sit still, and tell me whether you feel morally realigned." You stare at him. He jots something anyway. Victorian physicians diagnosed a number of conditions under the hazy umbrella of nervous disorders. Among the most notorious neurasthenia, a kind of fashionable exhaustion thought to affect city dwellers' readers of too many novels and people who thought too hard. In women, it was often labeled hysteria. In men, it was mental fatigue, more noble, apparently, because fainting with a mustache was socially acceptable. The cure movement. Controlled, repetitive, ideally outdoor. Cue the bicycle. Historians still debate whether doctors genuinely believed bicycles cured hysteria, or simply use the excuse to redirect energy and curb emotional outbursts. One famous therapist prescribed 4 laps daily, no looking at geese. Another warned that veering left repeatedly might trigger melancholic rhythms. You're now handed a tricycle. More stable, says the maid, for your inner turmoil. You sigh and pedal again. It's less like therapy and more like gently embarrassing exercise. But the courtyard roses smell nice, and for a moment, the breeze on your face feels less like prescription and more like permission. You pass another patient, a woman in a lace bonnet, muttering something about betrayal. Her handlebars are decorated with silk ribbons. She does not make eye contact. You're told not to speak unless you've completed the 3 circles of reflection. At the end of your ride, the doctor hands you a damp cloth and a biscuit. The biscuit is for grounding, he says. The cloth is for dignity. You wipe your forehead and immediately sneeze again. You whisper an apology to the air. The doctor gestures for you to sit on a stone bench. He begins to read aloud from Cycling and the Restoration of Moral Calm, a pamphlet written in 1893 by someone named Basil Thistlethwaite Esquire. It contains gems like pedal steadily and sins fall away. A good spin is as righteous as a silent prayer. Disobedient spleens often improve after inclines. Quirky tidbit. In some circles, bicycles were blamed for causing hysteria, especially in women. The sight of an unsupervised woman riding free through town could trigger moral panic. Articles warned of bicycle face a condition wherein the rider's expression became permanently wild-eyed from improper adventure. You wonder what your face looks like right now. Definitely a bit wild-eyed, possibly morally improved, at the very least flushed from effort. The doctor finishes his reading, folds the pamphlet, and gives you a satisfied nod. Very good. The worst of the nerves has been jostled into place. You are escorted back to your room, where the lights have been dimmed, and a strange man in a velvet jacket is waiting with a watch in one hand and a candle in the other. Mesmerist, the maid whispers. Of course. Of course, the day ends with hypnosis, because nothing says rest and recovery like a stranger swinging metal in your face. The man in the velvet jacket stands very still. His candle flickers slightly, casting an amber glow across his angular face. He adjusts the gold chain at his waist and lifts the small silver watch into view, letting it dangle and twist gently on its chain. You sit stiffly on the edge of your bed, still recovering from your emotional bike ride, wondering if this is hypnosis or a very elaborate mugging. He does not introduce himself. He simply says, "You are open now." Right. Victorians were absolutely captivated by mesmerism, a term inspired by Franz Anton Mesmer, the 18th century pioneer of animal magnetism. Mesmer believed all living things were filled with a kind of invisible fluid, and illness arose when this fluid was blocked or disrupted. Mesmerists, therefore, were trained in the gentle art of unblocking your inner soup, using focused attention, subtle gestures, and a slightly unsettling amount of eye contact. The mesmerist draws the chair closer. He doesn't touch you. This is a no-contact therapy. He swings the watch once, twice, then lets it settle into a rhythmic arc. You will feel your breath slow, he murmurs, and your liver forgive. You blink. It's hard to know what mesmerism actually felt like to Victorian patients. Some described warmth or dizziness or being filled with light. Others described crying uncontrollably or believing they could hear the thoughts of nearby furniture. Historians still argue whether it was true hypnosis, subtle peer pressure, or just really good acting. You stare at the watch. The ticking is barely audible. Your eyelids grow heavy, not from trance, but from the sheer exhaustion of a day that involves sulfur baths, etiquette drills, and a brief flirtation with magnetism. The mesmerist's voice is like molasses poured onto velvet. Your spleen is at peace, he says. Your kidneys are unburdened. He circles behind you and begins softly snapping his fingers near your ears. No one here is judging. Not even your pancreas. Quirky tidbit. Mesmerism became so popular that entire parlors were dedicated to magnetic evenings, where guests would gather to be entranced in batches like dreamy sacks of laundry. Some upper-class homes even employed a house mesmerist who performed daily fluid realignments between tea and biscuits. You feel something shift inside, not spiritually, just physically. The chair is hard, and your spine is asking very pointed questions about posture. The mesmerist leans in and whispers, "You are not heavy. You are not light. You are vapor made of calm decisions." He draws a spiral with his fingers in the air just above your forehead. You try not to giggle. He repeats a few gentle affirmations. Your bile flows as it should. You are no longer irritated by chimney sweepers. Tomorrow, you will crave only toast and harmony. Eventually, he places the watch back into his pocket. The session is over. You are not sure what has occurred. You feel both deeply seen and mildly hypnotized. The doctor re-enters, nodding at the mesmerist like a colleague returning from lunch. "We find it helps patients who resist the sweat cure," he explains. Your subconscious was clenching. You are too tired to object. You're handed a cup of warm milk laced with nutmeg and something they won't name. The doctor calls it nocturnal repose tonic. You sip. It tastes of cloves and mystery. Your bed now smells faintly of pine. Someone has tucked lavender under the sheets. A hedgehog made of brass sits on your pillow, presumably for good dreams or pest control. The lights dim. The mesmerist tips his hat. The maid blows out the final candle. And just as your thoughts begin to fade into the warm velvet, "Nothing," the doctor whispers. "Tomorrow, we address your migraines with ice cream." You are too tired to ask, but you already suspect it will be weirdly effective. Morning greets you with an unexpected chill, not from the window, which for once is mercifully closed, but from the spoon being pressed gently against your temple. The doctor stands beside your bed, holding a small porcelain bowl filled with a pale scoop of ice cream. "Vanilla," he says solemnly, the least emotionally disruptive of the flavors. You blink at him. He nods encouragingly. This, you are told, is the beginning of cold cream therapy, an experimental treatment for migraines, nervous overstimulation, and what the Victorians vaguely described as cranial congestion. The solution: apply frozen desserts directly to the skull. You shiver as the spoon touches your temple again. The doctor makes a note. The room is dim quiet and smells faintly of vanilla and old wallpaper. Outside, a bell chimes in the distance, as if to announce the arrival of whatever era this therapy belongs to. You take a cautious bite of the ice cream. It's delicious. Also, your jaw begins to throb. "Good," the doctor says. The headache is now visible. To the Victorian mind, migraines were more than just painful. they were moral. Some physicians believed they were the price of intelligence, or of too much embroidery, or even of misaligned ambition. Women were especially susceptible, according to the literature, due to interior thoughts pressing outward. No one explains what that means, but they all say it with great confidence. Historians still argue whether these migraine theories were rooted in actual observation or in a deep fear of women reading too much poetry by gaslight. Probably both. You're led to a small, velvet-curtained room labeled head repose chamber. Inside is a fainting couch, a black velvet eye mask, and a second smaller bowl of ice cream perched on a silver tray. You recline. The nurse places the bowl atop your head. You say nothing. You have given up asking questions. The cold seeps downward, numbing your scalp. Your headache, which had been lurking behind your eyes like a tax auditor, now recedes, confused perhaps by the sudden dairy attack. For 10 blissful minutes, you lie in a kind of frosty silence. Then comes the voice, not in your head, from the corner, a parrot. There, in a gilded cage, by the window, is a bright green parrot with a small ribbon tied to one leg. It blinks at you and says, "Temperance is key." You blink back. Victorians especially, those in mental health clinics, occasionally used animals in their therapies, not just as distractions, but as moral companions. A well-trained parrot might repeat proverbs all day long, reinforcing discipline and self-reflection. A hedgehog, quiet and humble, was thought to inspire modesty. There was even a brief trend of using therapy goats, though they were notoriously hard to moralize. Quirky tidbit. In 1891, a London doctor claimed to have trained a parrot to detect dishonesty in patients by how they reacted to its catchphrases. If someone flinched at clean thoughts, clean pores, the diagnosis was spiritual toxicity. This theory was never published in a reputable journal, but the parrot was reportedly very proud. You listen to the bird repeat its morning affirmations, moderation and jam, a tidy bed, a tidy head. Fear not the thunder of digestion. You're not sure if it's helping, but at least it's not electricity. After your session, the doctor gently removes the melting bowl from your crown. The brain runs cooler now, he says. You may find your dreams more linear. You return to your room in a mild trance. The sun has climbed higher. A warm breeze rustles the curtains. You sit on the bed and realize with some alarm that the thought of another parrot lecture doesn't horrify you. You've adapted. The maid arrives with a cup of mint water and a soft bundle wrapped in linen. She sets it on your lap. Your companion, she says. You unwrap it to find a hedgehog. Alive, sleepy, utterly unbothered. Pet therapy, she explains. Doctor says your pulse needs gentling. Of course it does. You stroke the hedgehog once. It sighs deeply. You feel your blood pressure drop. And just like that, it's time for your next appointment. The hedgehog is reluctant to leave your lap. And frankly, you don't blame it. But the maid insists he has his own schedule and scoops up your spiky companion like a tiny judgmental melon. You are alone again, but only for a moment. A soft knock, a creak of wood, and the doctor returns this time, carrying birdseed. He places it in a shallow dish by the window. Time for dawn conversation, he says with the parrots. You do not ask why there are multiple parrots now. You have learned. Today's therapy is more spiritual than physical, he explains. Less about the nerves, more about the soul. The Victorians understood that healing is not just internal, it is relational. You must speak your truth aloud, preferably to birds. You are ushered to a cushioned window seat draped in lace. Outside, the garden blooms quietly. Inside, perched along an indoor brass trellis, are 4 parrots, each a different shade of theological certainty. One turns its head and says, "Confess gently." Another responds, "Whimsy is not weakness." You glance toward the doctor. He nods solemnly. This is guided pet therapy. Speak freely. They do not judge. You blink. Then tentatively you say, "I sometimes fake illness to avoid social gatherings." A blue parrot flaps once and croaks, "Courage begins in the bath." This is apparently good. Victorian pet therapy wasn't always about comfort. It was often about reflection. Birds, especially parrots, were thought to be spiritual mirrors. What they repeated could reveal what you needed to hear. A kind of feathery confession booth. Some clinics even trained parrots to mimic the doctor's voice, delivering calming reminders like "breathe deeply, stand straighter," or "put down the ham." Historians still debate whether this was therapeutic brilliance or an elaborate distraction tactic, but it's hard to deny the charm of being lectured by something with talons. You are handed a small bell and told to ring it whenever you feel an emotional rising. You don't. The parrots seem content to whisper fragments of advice and peck the seed tray with saintly patience. You try again. I don't actually understand what spleens do. A red parrot flutters and says, "Do not fear your organs." You feel oddly validated. The doctor observes from a corner, scribbling into a leather-bound journal. Occasionally, he murmurs phrases like "avian alignment achieved," or "patient exhibits mild remorse, feathered with wonder." You make eye contact once. He smiles as if you've passed a test you didn't know was happening. Quirky tidbit. There was a brief Victorian movement known as ornithological divinism, in which patients were assigned birds, not based on preference, but temperament. Melancholics got doves, the anxious sparrows. One eccentric asylum director even believed crows could drain negative energy by proximity alone. He was later chased by his own therapy flock during feeding hour. After 20 minutes, the parrots grow quiet. One falls asleep upside down. You take this as a sign of closure. The doctor agrees. You are handed a white linen cloth to dab your eyes just in case, and led gently back to your room. There on the pillow is a folded note. Tonight, dream induction therapy. You will be wrapped in scented gauze and offered quiet music. That actually sounds nice. The maid arrives with a lavender compress and your hedgehog, now wearing a tiny felt hat. You settle in, still not entirely sure whether you've been healed, hypnotized, or recruited into an eccentric bird cult. But it hardly matters. You feel lighter, calmer, slightly more willing to talk to birds, and your spleen silent for now. Nightfall is gentle tonight. Not the sort of grand velvet descent you read about in serialized novels, but a slow, yawn-like folding of the sky into itself. The lamps have been turned low. The floorboards creak only when someone is being helpful. And your hedgehog, still wearing its tiny felt hat, is asleep beside your pillow, dreaming presumably of modest worms and moral restraint. It is time for dream induction therapy. The maid enters, carrying a shallow cedar box. Inside, gauze wraps infused with lavender neroli and something she calls moon balm. You ask what moon balm is. She shrugs. It's from a root, or maybe a poem. She begins wrapping your wrists, ankles, and forehead in the lightly scented gauze. The scent is subtle, clean, herbal, and very slightly powdery, like the first page of a very old book. You're then asked to lie flat and not move unless an emotion becomes too vivid to ignore. The doctor enters, without sound, carrying a curious instrument, a small wooden flute with only 3 holes. He does not play it. He simply places it on the bedside table, as if it might absorb your dreams by osmosis. Then he speaks very softly. This is the part where the body loosens from the mind, and the mind drifts through safe halls. Victorian physicians were fascinated by dreams not just as random brain theater, but as diagnostic terrain. A patient who dreamed of ladders might be climbing toward forgiveness. One who dreamed of horses likely had unresolved stomach issues. And flying. That could mean anything from joy to dangerously high blood pressure. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were serious theories or poetic guesswork. But many sanatoriums treated dreams as medical records. Some even kept dream loggers, scribes, who would sit by the bedside and transcribe whispered dream reports at dawn. A few of these journals survive, filled with fragile handwriting and recurring themes of gardens, rain, and large judgmental turnips. Your gauze wrappings are warmed by small linen bricks soaked in chamomile steam. One is placed at your feet. Another rests over your sternum. You are slowly becoming a sleepy human sandwich. Music begins, just a few notes from a glass harmonica, which sounds like someone whispering through crystal. It plays from somewhere behind the curtain, ghostly and round. The doctor holds up a single finger and says, "Tonight when the owl calls 3 times, your dreams will shift." Let them. Don't hold on. You are fairly certain there is no owl. Quirky tidbit. In 1885, a Welsh physician claimed that patients who were read poetry in iambic pentameter while sleeping recovered from influenza 2 days faster than others. The Royal College of Physicians declined to publish his findings, but he later published them anyway, with footnotes from a goose. The scent of the gauze deepens. Your chest rises and falls. The hedgehog sighs again. The flute remains unplayed, but comforting, and you strangely, finally feel ready to sleep. Just before your eyes close fully, the maid returns one last time. She places a folded sheet of paper on your bedside table. In careful script, it reads, "Tomorrow you will wake. You will eat porridge. You will tell us your dreams. And we will nod like it all makes sense." You drift. The gauze shifts slightly with your breath. And outside in the dark garden, something calls once, twice, maybe even 3 times. You awaken slowly, very slowly. Your eyes stay closed longer than they need to. Your limbs feel like they're made of the same gauze that wrapped them last night, as if the dream therapy softened not just your thoughts, but your very edges. The pillow is cool. The sheets smell faintly of mint and lavender. And for the first time since arriving in this peculiar little clinic of hugs and hot potatoes, you feel no immediate fear about what the doctor might bring next. The hedgehog is awake before you are quietly sitting near your elbow with its hat slightly askew. You decide not to fix it. Some things are more noble when left imperfect. The door creaks open, and in an unusual break from tradition, it's the maid who speaks first. "No treatments this morning," she whispers. "Just resting. And porridge." You nod. The porridge is served in a ceramic bowl with a spoon made of horn. It's warm, unflavored, but somehow perfect. It holds its shape like everything here and asks nothing of you. A parrot nearby mutters, "Chew slowly, think kindly. You do both." The doctor appears not in his usual tweed, but in something looser, simpler. A linen robe. His hair is a bit tousled. He looks like someone who has finally remembered that rest is also medicine. "You've done well," he says. "Your pulse has found its rhythm, and your liver no longer disagrees with the moon." You thank him, not because you understand, but because you've grown fond of his brand of nonsense. Victorian medicine has not cured you, not in the modern sense, but it's wrapped you in warmth, rocked you with rituals, and distracted you with parakeets long enough for your nervous system to stop impersonating a haunted kettle. Historians still argue whether these treatments were healing theatrical or simply deeply British. Perhaps all three. As you sip the last of your barley water, the doctor takes a folded sheet of paper from his robe and places it beside your bowl. "Your discharge notes," he says. You open it. Inside are 6 phrases. Take air when you can. Fear less of the spleen. Touch is not weakness. Laughter is not leakage. Drink warm things. Forgive the brain its moods. There is no signature, just a pressed violet in the corner. You are led gently to the door. Outside, the breeze is cool, familiar. The birds chirp. The roses bloom without being asked. Your thoughts are quieter now, your breath slower. You glance back only once and see the parrot nodding sagely in the window. You nod back, and with that, the door closes softly behind you, and the noise of the world seems far, far away now. Your feet carry you down the garden path slower than usual, but more certain somehow. The gravel crunches beneath your shoes, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat remembered after a long, strange dream. The air is thick with the scent of lavender and early dew. Somewhere not far, a fountain gurgles quietly, as if whispering to itself in half-remembered rhymes. A breeze stirs the ivy along the wall. It brushes gently against your cheek, cool and welcome, like the breath of something ancient. Everything feels slower. The trees no longer loom, they cradle. The shadows are no longer heavy, they soothe. Even your bones, still carrying echoes of electricity and damp flannel, seem to hum in contentment. You pause at the garden gate and take one long, steady breath. Let it fill every inch of you. Let it bring softness to your jaw, stillness to your shoulders, and weight to your eyelids. No need to think now. No need to remember where the potatoes went or what the parrot meant. Just rest. Let the scent of lavender linger a little longer. Let the warmth of your hedgehog-shaped memories curl up somewhere in your chest. And if your dreams tonight are filled with bicycles, steam baths, and whispering spoons, that's all right. You've earned your sleep. Sweet dreams.